What's something you saw your parents do as a kid that you thought was normal? Until you tried explaining it to someone else? When I was a kid, I thought every family had rules like mine. Not written ones, not things you'd find taped to the fridge with colorful magnets. No, ours were silent, bone deep, and enforced with eyes and fists instead of words. Rule 1. Smile at the dinner table. If you didn't, Mom would slam her fork down so hard the plates would rattle, and she'd say something like, "Why are you trying to ruin this family?" Rule 2. Never let the food get cold. If it did, even by a minute, she'd scrape it off the plate into the trash and tell you to eat faster next time. Rule 3. If Dad's car pulled into the driveway and the house wasn't spotless, someone would bleed. Not always literally, but you'd feel it. Sometimes it was a slap, sometimes it was a storm of yelling that left your ears ringing and your throat aching from not crying. And the worst rule, the one I never knew was a rule until I broke it, was this: never talk about the rules. Not at school. Not to friends. Not even to each other, my brother and I. That's just how things were. I didn't realize how twisted that was until much later, until I tried explaining it to someone and saw their face contort in horror. But back then, it all made sense. I thought discipline meant being locked in a dark closet for 2 hours if you raised your voice. I thought respect meant saying yes, ma'am, even when my mother was calling me worthless. I thought obedience meant knowing how to read moods the second someone walked in the room. My brother, Noah, and I turned survival into a kind of quiet game: who could avoid setting them off, who could smile longest even when it hurt, who could take the blame faster so it wouldn't get worse. We'd laugh about it sometimes, in that way kids do when they don't know what else to do. I remember one Christmas morning when I opened a present and didn't smile fast enough, and Mom snatched it from my hands and said, "Ungrateful children grow up to be garbage." She tossed the toy in the fireplace. The flames took it quickly. I remember looking at Noah and seeing his face, completely calm. Numb. Like me. That was the rule, too: don't react. Emotions were dangerous. They were proof that you were weak. And weak people got destroyed. So I became what they needed: a quiet, tidy, polite little girl who always smiled and never asked questions. I didn't cry when my hamster died. I didn't complain when my clothes got too small. I didn't say anything when Mom burned my drawings because they had demons in them. I thought every mom did that. I really did. It wasn't until much later, so much later, that I realized those weren't rules. They were wounds that never stopped bleeding. But as a kid, they were my world. And I followed them like gospel, thinking that if I was good enough, small enough, perfect enough, maybe I'd finally be safe. Noah and I invented what we call the silence game around the time I turned 9 and he was 6. It started like a joke, a kind of secret code between siblings who didn't know how to say "I'm scared" out loud. The rules were simple: whoever could go the longest without talking to Mom won. But it evolved, as all survival games do. Soon, it wasn't just silence with her, it was with each other, too. We learned to communicate in glances, in the way we moved, in how quickly we cleaned our plates or how softly we walked across the floor. We could read each other's minds from across the house. I could tell when he was about to get hit just by the way he shifted in his seat. He could tell when I needed to cry just by the way I clutched my fork too tightly. The silence game wasn't really a game at all. It was armor. It was strategy. It was the only way we could control anything in a world where control was stripped from us daily. I remember one night, Mom lost it because Noah left a sock in the hallway. A single sock. She screamed so loud her voice cracked, and Dad, who'd just come home, grabbed Noah by the collar and slammed him into the wall. I froze. Not out of shock, I was used to it, but because I didn't want to lose. If I made a sound, if I flinched, if I spoke, I lost. Noah looked at me as he cried, his lip bleeding, and I just sat there, silent. Afterward, when we were in our room and the door was closed, I whispered, "You almost made me lose." He didn't laugh. He just nodded, and then we sat back to back on the floor, not saying a word for the rest of the night. The next morning, Mom made pancakes like nothing happened. That was another part of the game, pretending. You had to pretend you were grateful. You had to smile. You had to say thank you while your cheeks still stung and your knees still ached from kneeling in the hallway for an hour. I thought everyone did that. I thought every family had a no talking during commercials rule. I thought everyone said "I love you" like it was a prayer, not a feeling, just something you had to say to avoid punishment. I once tried explaining the silence game to a friend during recess. I was 9. I remember her face, confused and kind of sad, and she said, "That doesn't sound like a game." I laughed and said, "You just don't get it." But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about her face. It was the first time a seed of doubt was planted. Maybe it wasn't normal. Maybe it wasn't right. But I buried that thought deep. Because when you're a child, the idea that your parents might be wrong is more terrifying than anything. You'd rather believe the pain is your fault than accept that the people who feed you and tuck you in are the ones breaking you. So Noah and I kept playing. And the worst part? We got good at it. So good that even now, as an adult, I still find myself flinching when someone raises their voice. I still default to silence when things get hard. I still feel like I'm winning when I don't cry. Like the game never really ended. Like I'm still playing. The first time I saw real blood, it wasn't mine or Noah's, it was my mother's, and it didn't come from violence in the traditional sense, but from something far more disturbing, something that haunted me long after the scene ended. I was 10, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, pretending not to listen as Mom scrubbed dishes with an intensity that made the faucet shake. She was muttering under her breath, something about ungrateful children and how no one sees what I give. The water was running so hot I could see steam rising from the sink. I remember the sound of the glass shattering first, sharp and immediate, followed by her sharp intake of breath. I looked up just in time to see her hand covered in bright red, a chunk of the broken glass embedded in her palm. But she didn't cry out. She didn't flinch. She didn't even stop moving. She stood there for what felt like minutes, watching the blood drip into the sink like it was nothing, like it was just another chore to clean up. And then, slowly, she turned to me and smiled. A strange, vacant smile. Her eyes were wide, too wide, and her voice was eerily calm when she said, "You see? Even I bleed for this family." I didn't know what to say. I just stared at her, confused, scared, wondering if she expected me to get a towel or fall to my knees in gratitude. She walked to the cabinet, pulled out a roll of paper towels, and wrapped her hand with mechanical precision. Not a wince. Not a sound. Then she dumped the shattered glass into the trash and went back to washing dishes with the uninjured hand. I remember the smell of blood mixing with the lemon-scented soap. I remember how my stomach turned and I had to run to the bathroom to throw up silently. I sat on the cold tile floor for a long time trying to figure out why that moment felt worse than any slap, any punishment, any scream. And I think now, looking back, it's because that was the day I realized how deep her sickness ran. It wasn't just anger or control, it was martyrdom. She needed to bleed. She needed to suffer. And worse, she needed us to see it. To believe that every bruise she left on us was somehow matched by her own invisible wounds. She needed to be the victim and the executioner all at once. That's when I started noticing the little cuts on her arms. The way she'd dig her nails into her own skin when Dad raised his voice. The way she sometimes slapped herself in the face before he could. And somehow, in that twisted system of rules, it made sense. Because if she hurt herself, it meant she cared. If she bled, it meant we deserved to suffer too. It meant pain was proof of love. I never told anyone about the blood. Not even Noah. We didn't talk about it. That was the unspoken rule. Instead, I added it to my list of things to never mention: broken glass, bleeding palms, fake smiles. I added don't stare too long and always say thank you to that same internal manual. I became an expert in swallowing questions. I learned that sometimes, the most terrifying monsters don't roar, they whisper while they bleed and expect applause. And I clapped, silently, because that's what daughters do in houses like mine. They clap, and smile, and clean up the blood, and call it love. It was summer when they locked Noah in the basement, one of those blistering days when the air outside felt like it had weight, like it pressed down on you just for trying to breathe. I was 11. He was 8. The heat made us sluggish, and I remember the way the sunlight outside looked like gold through the kitchen window, a light that didn't belong in that house. Noah spilled a bottle of dish soap. That was the sin. Not on purpose, not even carelessly. He tried to help clean the counter after lunch and squeezed too hard. The plastic slipped from his hands and skidded across the tile, spinning as the clear gel oozed out like a wound. My mother stared at it for a moment like she was watching a crime scene unfold, then slowly turned to him. "Go downstairs," she said. Her voice was flat. That was how you knew it was bad, not when she shouted, but when she whispered. Noah froze. He looked at me. I didn't move. I wanted to. God, I wanted to grab his hand, to stand in front of him, to scream, but all I did was lower my eyes, because if I looked too long, I'd lose the silence game. I'd cry. And if I cried, she'd punish us both. "Now," she said again, and Noah shuffled to the door at the far end of the hallway, the one we weren't supposed to open, the one that led to the unfinished basement with no windows, no light, and the smell of mold that clung to your clothes like shame. The door creaked open, then closed. The lock clicked. I remember hearing him knock once, softly. Then silence. I waited for my father to come home, to unlock it, to at least ask why, but he didn't even look at the door when he walked past it hours later. He just went to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sat down in front of the TV like the basement didn't exist. I tried to sneak him food that night. Peanut butter crackers, a juice box. I stuffed it all into a sock and slid it under the door. I whispered, "It's okay, I'm here," and I think I heard him sniffle, but I might have imagined it. I spent the night on the hallway floor, hurled against the wall across from that locked door, listening. Listening for movement. For crying. For monsters. The next morning, Mom let him out like nothing had happened. "Learned your lesson?" she asked. He nodded. His eyes were red. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His lips cracked. He never told me what he thought about in there, and I never asked. That was our agreement. That was the price of surviving. I watched him become quieter after that. More obedient. Not because he respected them, but because he feared them in a way that carved new lines into his little body, invisible to everyone but me. From then on, every time I saw him flinch or twitch at a loud sound, I saw that door. I saw him behind it. I saw me doing nothing. And that guilt, that heavy, choking guilt, never left me. People talk about childhood homes like they're places of warmth and nostalgia. But mine had a dungeon. A door. A lock. And a little boy no one came for. Except me. And even then, it wasn't enough. By the time I turned 14, I had stopped feeling anything at all. No sadness, no joy, no fear, just this dull static inside me that made everything seem far away, like I was watching my life through a screen I couldn't touch. People at school said I was calm, mature for my age. Teachers praised how focused I was, how quiet, how composed. I'd nod, thank them, go home, and sit on my bed for hours staring at the same page of a book, unable to read a single sentence. I wasn't tired, just empty. Completely hollow. My body still moved, still responded when called, still smiled when expected, but my mind was somewhere else, folded into itself like an animal in hibernation. The only time I felt anything sharp was when I hurt myself, and even that was more curiosity than desperation. I'd sit in the bathroom with a paperclip or safety pin and draw slow lines across my thigh just to see if I could feel it. Not because I wanted to die, but because I needed to confirm I was still alive. The blood, bright and thin, felt like proof. I never went too deep. I didn't want scars. I just wanted sensation. Something real. Something mine. When my mother found my journal one day, the one place I wrote anything close to the truth, she didn't cry or ask questions. She walked into the backyard, lit the barbecue, and burned it without saying a word. I watched the pages curl and blacken through the kitchen window, my reflection flickering in the glass like a ghost. That night, she said, "Don't ever shame this family like that again." I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I just went upstairs and lay flat on the floor, staring at the ceiling for so long that my limbs went numb. That became my new habit, lying on the floor. Something about the cold tiles grounded me, reminded me I was still anchored to the earth. I stopped drawing, stopped writing, stopped laughing. Even Noah, who had once been the only light in that house, had become quiet in a different way, not the defensive silence of a child trying to survive, but the resigned stillness of someone who no longer expected anything better. He kept his head down, his answers short. We passed each other in the hallway like strangers. One time, I touched his arm just to see if he'd flinch. He didn't. But he didn't look at me, either. It was like we'd both agreed, silently, to shut the world out before it consumed us whole. And the worst part? No one outside our home ever noticed. We were polite, clean, well-spoken. We got good grades. Smiled in family photos. Wore matching outfits for Christmas. We were the picture of a perfect family, and everyone believed it. Especially us. Because if you repeat a lie long enough, even your own reflection starts to nod in agreement. I remember once sitting at a birthday party, watching the other girls scream with laughter over a game of truth or dare, and feeling like I was on another planet. I couldn't relate. Couldn't participate. Couldn't fake it well enough to pretend I cared. One girl asked what I'd do if I had $1 million. I said I'd buy silence. Everyone laughed. I smiled too. But I meant it. I didn't want noise or fun or freedom. I wanted a world where no one yelled, no one touched, no one noticed. I wanted to float in the quiet, forever. That's what numbness felt like, peaceful, at first. But eventually, it becomes its own kind of prison. And I was already serving a life sentence. When I was 16, I invited a friend from school to sleep over. Her name was Haley. She was the kind of girl who wore colorful socks, laughed too loud in class, and didn't seem to care what people thought. I liked that about her. I envied it. We weren't particularly close, but I think a part of me wanted to test something, like maybe if I brought a stranger into our house, it would behave differently. Maybe my parents would wear their best faces a little longer. Maybe I'd get to pretend, just for one night, that my life was like everyone else's. Haley arrived with a sleeping bag, a bag of popcorn, and a DVD of a movie I wasn't allowed to watch. I snuck it past my mom by saying it was educational, and surprisingly, she didn't press. We ate chips in my room, painted our nails, and for a while, I felt normal. Until Noah dropped a towel on the bathroom floor. It wasn't even wet, just folded carelessly on the tile. I didn't notice until I heard my mother scream. That high-pitched, glass-shattering tone that made my skin crawl. Haley froze. "What the hell?" she whispered. Before I could answer, Mom burst into the room. She wasn't yelling words, just sound. Raw fury. She grabbed Noah by the arm and dragged him down the hallway, her fingernails digging into his skin. He didn't resist. Didn't speak. Didn't look at us. He just walked. Like he'd been programmed. Haley stood beside me, silent, eyes wide. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even feel surprised, it was just another Tuesday for me. But to her, it was a horror film. After a minute, I told her, "It's okay. She's just mad." Haley blinked. That wasn't okay. I shrugged, sat down, turned the TV back on. "It's fine. She'll calm down." Haley didn't sit. She stared at me like I'd grown 2 heads. "Do they always scream like that?" she asked. "Only when someone messes up," I said, without looking away from the screen. "You'll get used to it." But she didn't. That night, she barely spoke. She curled up in her sleeping bag like a frightened animal and asked to go home early the next morning. I told my mom she got sick. Mom didn't ask questions. Later that week at school, Haley avoided me. Eventually, she pulled me aside in the locker room and said, "What happened that night? That wasn't normal. Your mom scared me." I remember feeling angry. Not at her, but at myself. For letting her in. For letting her see. For letting her name it. Because once someone else called it what it was, I couldn't keep pretending. Her words echoed in my head, that wasn't normal. I'd spent 16 years believing the opposite. That if I kept quiet enough, obedient enough, still enough, it would all make sense someday. But in that moment, I felt a crack in the wall. I started noticing the things I'd ignored for years. The way the house never had laughter. The way Noah flinched when the phone rang. The way I couldn't remember the last time I'd hugged anyone without bracing for pain. Haley never came over again. We drifted apart. She probably told someone, maybe her mom, maybe a teacher. But no one came knocking. No one saved us. The world outside kept spinning, and I kept pretending. But now, the pretending took more effort. Every smile was heavier. Every silence louder. Every moment of peace stained with the knowledge that I was broken in ways I couldn't even explain. Haley planted something inside me that day. A tiny seed of doubt. Of truth. And no matter how much I tried to smother it, it kept growing. I didn't walk into therapy willingly. It was a requirement, part of a university support program after I had a panic attack in the middle of a literature class. One minute I was reading aloud, the next I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't move. My professor thought I was having a seizure. When I woke up in the nurse's office, I was shaking and crying and couldn't explain why. So, they referred me. Just a few sessions, they said. See how it goes. I nodded like I always did and showed up exactly on time to the sterile office with a fake plant and the woman with the soft voice and wide eyes. Her name was Dana. She looked like someone who drank herbal tea and meant well. She smiled too much. Asked open-ended questions. Tell me about your childhood. I froze. I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain that your entire life was a performance and you still don't know who you were playing? That you had no memories that weren't layered with fear? I told her I had a strict household. That my mom was particular. That my dad was tired a lot. She nodded like she understood. She didn't. No one could. She asked me how I dealt with conflict growing up, and I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the idea of conflict implied conversation. We didn't talk in my house. We obeyed. We survived. We disappeared. After a few sessions, I told her about the silence game, about the way Noah and I used to compete over who could avoid attention the longest. She tilted her head and whispered, "That's not a game, you know. That's trauma." The word sat between us like a crack in the floor. Trauma. I didn't like that word. It made things too real. Too permanent. Too medical. I wanted to believe I was just a good kid from a tough family, not a walking case file. But the more I spoke, the more she leaned in with pity. That's when I shut down. I stopped showing up. I told the school I was fine. I told my boyfriend at the time that I was just overwhelmed with school. But the truth was, therapy broke something open, and I didn't know how to survive the fallout. I started having nightmares again. I'd wake up gasping, convinced I was back in the house, that my mother was screaming in the hallway, that Noah was crying in the basement, that I was frozen at the top of the stairs, doing nothing. I tried writing things down, like Dana suggested, but the words made me feel sick. I ripped the pages up and flushed them. I tried meditating. That made it worse. The silence was too familiar. It echoed like the old house, and my body tensed at every breath. I realized I wasn't afraid of noise, I was afraid of stillness. Because in stillness, the ghosts came back. I avoided mirrors. I avoided certain songs. I avoided people who asked too many questions. And more than anything, I avoided myself. Because somewhere inside me, buried deep, was a version of me that wanted to scream, to break, to point and say, "Look what they did to me." But I couldn't let her out. Because if I did, I didn't think I'd survive it. Dana called twice after I stopped going. Left kind messages. Told me she was there when I was ready. I deleted them. Not because I hated her. But because I hated the version of myself she saw, the girl who wasn't holding it together. The girl who was fractured. Weak. Needing help. And I didn't know how to be that person. I still don't. It took me 3 glasses of wine and the sound of a storm outside to finally sit down and write the letter. I didn't plan to. I didn't think I ever would. But that night, something cracked inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, just a subtle fracture, the kind that lets air into a wound you've been pretending doesn't exist. I opened my laptop, but it felt too formal, too clinical. I needed to feel the scratch of ink, the weight of the words, so I grabbed a legal pad and a pen that had dried out from disuse, and I started with the obvious, "Dear Mom and Dad." The moment I wrote it, my hand trembled. It looked so childish on the page. I'd written that phrase 100 times in school essays, in fake letters during class exercises, but never like this. Never when I meant it. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know which memories belonged in a letter and which belonged in the abyss. So I just wrote. I wrote about the first time I remember feeling scared in our home, how Mom's face didn't move when she yelled, how Dad's silence was worse than any shout. I wrote about the basement, about Noah's eyes when he came out, and how I never forgave myself for not breaking that door down. I wrote about the blood in the sink and the burned journal and how I stopped drawing because everything I created felt like a threat to your version of reality. I wrote about how I'd flinch every time someone raised their voice, even now, even at work, even when it's not about me. I wrote about how you taught me to smile through pain so convincingly that I sometimes catch myself grinning during panic attacks. I wrote about the silence game. About how I still play it. Every time I avoid a difficult conversation. Every time I minimize my feelings. Every time I pretend I'm fine just to avoid being a burden. I wrote about therapy. About how I quit because my therapist saw too much. About how I couldn't admit that the people I loved most were the ones who carved the deepest scars into me. I didn't use poetic metaphors or try to sound impressive. I was just honest. Brutally, sickeningly honest. And when I got to the last page, I wrote something I never thought I'd be able to say: "You broke me." Then I paused. For a long time. Just sat there staring at those words like they were alive, like they might leap off the page and stab me. You broke me. But I wasn't done. I wrote one more sentence underneath, but I built something out of the pieces. I don't know where it came from, but it felt real. Not hopeful, just true. I sat there for maybe an hour, reading the whole thing from top to bottom, and I cried. The kind of crying that rips something out of you. The kind you don't come back from the same. Then I folded the letter neatly, placed it in an envelope, sealed it, and held it against my chest. I thought about sending it. I really did. But then I walked to the fireplace and burned it. Watched the edges curl and blacken, just like the journal Mom torched all those years ago. But this time, it was my choice. My fire. My release. I didn't need them to read it. I just needed to let it go. And as the ashes drifted up the chimney, I whispered something I hadn't said out loud in years. I survived you. That was the night I stopped waiting for closure. And started creating distance instead. I hadn't seen Noah in almost 6 years when he texted me out of the blue. It was a simple message: "Are you free this weekend?" No punctuation. No context. Just those 5 words. But I stared at them for nearly an hour, heart pounding, mouth dry, as if the past itself had found my number and wanted to ask if I was still pretending. I didn't even know where he lived anymore. The last time we'd spoken, he was leaving for a job in another state, some mechanical thing that kept his hands busy and his thoughts quiet. I said I was proud of him. He nodded. That was it. We were both so good at not saying anything that we'd mastered the art of drifting without drama. But this text. It pulled something to the surface I hadn't felt in years. Not quite fear, not quite longing. Just a weight I didn't realize I was still carrying. We met at a park halfway between our cities, neutral ground. It was early evening, the kind of cold that nips at your ears but not enough to hurt. I saw him first, leaning against the railing by the duck pond, hands in his coat pockets, head down. When I walked up, he looked at me and smiled in that small, guarded way I remembered so well. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I answered. We stood there, side by side, saying nothing for several minutes, watching ducks glide across dark water. It felt natural, that silence. Familiar. Like an old coat you never stopped wearing. But it wasn't heavy this time. It was tentative. Curious. Like both of us were reaching towards something without knowing what. "Do you remember the towel?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. My stomach flipped. I nodded. "She screamed so loud," he said, laughing softly, but there was no humor in it. "And you just kept painting your nails like it was normal." I winced. "I was trying to keep you safe." He nodded again, not to agree or disagree, just to let the truth settle between us. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You remember the basement?" My throat tightened. I nodded again. 12 hours, he whispered. I counted the seconds. I reached for his hand, instinctively, and this time he didn't pull away. His fingers were cold, but they gripped mine like an anchor. "I'm sorry I didn't do more," I said. My voice cracked. "I should have kicked the door down." "I should have, you were a kid," he interrupted. "We both were. We did what we had to do." We sat on a bench for a long time after that, trading fragments of memory like war veterans comparing scars. He told me about the time he ran out into the backyard and screamed into the bushes because he didn't know what else to do. I told him about the night I lay on the bathroom floor and whispered, "I wish I wasn't real." We laughed at things we never should have had to endure. We cried for things we didn't even realize we were still carrying. And in the middle of it all, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote a letter too," he said. "Didn't send it either." I unfolded it carefully. His handwriting was messier than I remembered. The letter wasn't long, but every line was a wound laid bare. "They made us hate ourselves," it said. "But we're still here." I looked at him, eyes stinging. "We are still here," I echoed. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. We didn't hug like movie siblings or promise to fix everything. But in that moment, we were 2 kids who had walked through hell, found each other again, and finally said what we were never allowed to say: "We remember. We survived. We are not broken anymore, we are just unfinished." A few months after seeing Noah, I found myself driving through my old hometown for the first time in over a decade. I didn't plan it. I was coming back from a work trip, took a wrong exit, and suddenly there I was, on streets that hadn't changed, beneath trees that somehow looked smaller now, more ordinary. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I turned onto our old street. My hands shook on the wheel. My heart thudded loud enough to drown out the music. And when I saw that house, I pulled over across the street and just stared. It had a fresh coat of paint. The fence was replaced. The yard looked neater. But the shape was the same. The windows still had the same number of panes. The steps creaked when someone came out, a young woman holding a baby, laughing on the phone. I watched her walk down those same steps I used to sit on when I wanted to pretend we were normal. She didn't know what had happened there. She didn't know that once, in that living room, a girl learned to smile through terror. That in that basement, a little boy counted the seconds like prayers. That behind those walls, silence wasn't peaceful, it was survival. I could feel the sweat on my palms. My chest tightened. For a split second, I wanted to get out. Knock on the door. Tell her to be kind to her child. To never weaponize love. To never ask her baby to bleed to be seen. But I didn't. Because this wasn't my story anymore. It didn't live there. It lived in me. In the way I still hesitate before raising my voice. In the way I apologize too quickly. In the way I still check my face in mirrors to make sure I look harmless. In the way I sleep with the door cracked open, just a little, just enough to prove I'm not locked in. And that's the truth I've come to live with: the past doesn't go away. It doesn't evaporate. It embeds itself. In reflexes. In reactions. In the pauses between what you want to say and what you actually say. Healing, I've learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to hold the weight differently. To carry it without letting it crush you. I sat there in my car for nearly 30 minutes, letting the memories wash over me, not fighting them, not indulging them, just noticing. Witnessing. For once, I didn't look away. And then I put the car in gear, turned back toward the highway, and didn't look back again. I didn't need to. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need them to understand. I didn't need a confrontation or a final scene. I just needed to know that I was no longer the girl hiding under the table. I was the woman driving away, on her own terms, with nothing in the rearview mirror that could stop her anymore. People ask me now about my family, and I just say, we don't talk. And that's enough. Because the full truth, the real truth, doesn't need to be spoken aloud to be real. I lived it. I survived it. And every day, I choose not to repeat it. That's my story. Not the one they gave me. The one I wrote myself, from the ashes.